Two more passages today, one from the end of the book of Job, chapter 42, verses 1 through 6, and verses 10 through 17, and the other from the letter of James. Listen now again for the word of God. Then Job answered the Lord, "I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not yet know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you declare to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear." Listen to that phrase again. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. And then he prays, and we go to verse 10. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then therefore there came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and they ate bread with him in his house, and they showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil the Lord had brought upon him, and each of them gave him a piece of money and a gold ring. The Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He named his daughters the first Jemimah, the second Keziah, and the third Keren-Hapuk. And then all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters. And their father gave them an inheritance along with their brothers. After this, Job lived 140 years and saw his children and his children's children 4 generations. And Job died old and full of days. James chapter 5, verses 7 through 11. Be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also must be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. See, the judge is standing at the doors. As an example of suffering and patience, beloved, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Indeed, we call blessed those who showed endurance. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The patience of Job, that is the subject before the house today. The patience of Job. 3 points emerge from these texts. The first one goes like this. Patience is hard for those of us starting out in the faith or those of us who have only inherited the faith but not made it our own. Patience is hard for those of us starting out in the faith because we tend to think we have all the answers, and thinking we have all the answers, we tend to rush just a little bit too fast. This is true in every area of life, those starting out, whether it's in sports or education or life itself. It's true in fishing. I'm not a very good fisherman because I am a very impatient person, and you need to be patient to be a good fisherman. Now, unlike fly fishing, which I have never really tried before, most fishing involves just sitting around, and this is very hard for me to do. I just can't sit around like that. Years ago, one summer, a friend and former parishioner, Jake, and I were out in a lake in Colorado, and we were in a boat, and we were fishing away, and he was trying to help me understand how to do this, and all of a sudden I was pulling in a whopper, and he said, "Let me help you unhook it." And I said, "No, I can do it." "No, let me help you, please." And he began to do it, and I said, "You about got it, Jake? Here, I can help." He says, "Patience, Bill, patience." And I said, "No, let me help." And I jerked it out, and the fish went into the water, and the hook went right into his thumb, which caused him to say a few words I cannot repeat here in this place. He had to go to the hospital, and he has never invited me to fish with him again. Patience is hard for those of us starting out in whatever it is, fishing or faith. And it's also hard for those of us who only have an inherited faith. And through most of the book of Job, that's what Job seems to have. Look at him. The guy's got everything. He's got a wonderful family, very successful business. He's living life in the fast lane, the wealthiest man in the land. It's all good. What could possibly go wrong? And then one day, he lost it all. In the blink of an eye, flocks, family, finances, everything. And at this moment, we discover what Job is really made of, which is what God and Satan wanted to bet on. They wanted to see how he would do. God betting on Job to win, Satan betting on him only to place or show, and maybe not even that. And I'm sure there must have been moments when God wondered whether he had made a good bet on Job. So just as God wonders sometimes about us, how we are going to handle life when crisis hits, because it will hit at some point or another. If you're old enough, like me, you will know it will hit. I love this anonymous quotation. People are like tea bags. You never know how strong they are until they're in hot water. There's a lot of truth to that. And that's what we see with Job. Now, some people talk a lot about the patience of Job, but if you read the book really closely, you will wonder about that. Patience, says Barclay, is too passive a term for Job. And read your way through the epic drama captured in the works of Carlyle and Robert Frost and McLeish and all different kinds of writers. And you will see Job as a man who is passionately resenting what has come upon him. He is passionately questioning all the conventional arguments of his so-called friends. He is passionately agonizing over the fact that God may have forsaken him and gone off and left him, just forgotten him. The way some people in Pittsburgh might feel today. Sometimes we feel that way, don't we, because of things that happen in our lives or our country, our world. And Job, like the psalmist, cries out, "How long, O Lord? Why, O Lord?" People in Pittsburgh must be crying that right now. It is the cry of the Jews in the Holocaust. It is the cry of the Jewish nation throughout its history. How long, O Lord? O Lord? Why are these things happening to us? Why do they keep happening? Job cries it out in part because he is living on only an inherited faith. In fact, if you look closely at that verse 5, you will see that a good Hebrew translation of that verse is he only had a hearsay faith, a hearsay religion. He had heard about God, and that's true for a lot of us. We know about God, but it's a kind of pedantic academic knowledge. We see God with humanity's calculated imagination or humanity's ideas of morality and justice, but we maybe got it from our parents, but it's just an inherited faith. It's just a hearsay religion. Job got it from the tradition of the ancients, from the wisdom of those who had gone before him, but it wasn't quite his yet. He couldn't see God yet until we get to the very end of the book. And here's the problem. When crisis hits, if you're only living on an inherited faith, it won't get you through it. When death robs you of a father or a mother, and it does and it will. When death robs you of a spouse or a child, and it does and it will. When life comes crashing down upon you as it did in that synagogue yesterday morning, and it does and it will. When your health falls apart, if you're living only on an inherited faith, you won't be able to make it. So the first point here is patience is hard for those of us who are just starting out in the faith or only living on an inherited faith. The second point is that patience means understanding that God's purposes take time to work out. And those of us who are impatient don't like that at all. We don't even want to hear it. I love the little motto. It's on a poster. You'll see it on bumper stickers, different places. Lord, give me patience, but I want it right now. Some of us feel that way, don't we? The great New England preacher Phillips Brooks, known for his poise, was once observed pacing around fast around his office like a caged lion. His friend said, "What's the trouble?" He said, "The trouble is I want something and I'm in a hurry, but God isn't." Job wanted an answer to why all these things had happened, and his so-called friends have all these, no help at all. And we want the answer right now. These things happen to us. We want it. We want to know why that happened in Pittsburgh yesterday. Rabbi Kushner didn't say why bad things happen to good people. He said when bad things happen to good people. See, to understand patience in the Bible is to understand that it takes time for God's purposes to work out. Think about it in terms of trees. You can't rush a tree. Look at the great redwoods of California. Look at the great cathedrals of Europe. Many of them took 5 centuries to build. Workmen come and go. They live and they die. They never get to see the finished product. Things take time in God's purposes to work out. The poet Heine was standing before the Cathedral of Amiens, that beautiful cathedral in France, with a friend. They were just standing there in awe of this great beauty. And finally, the friend turns to the poet Heine and says, "Why can't humans build like this anymore?" And the poet says, "Because back then, human beings had convictions, and all we moderns have is opinions, and it takes more than an opinion to build a cathedral. Today, we would say it takes more than a text. It takes more than a tweet." God's purposes take time to work out, and we need patience to understand that. Leonardo da Vinci was painting one of the walls in the refectory in Milan, and he was painting the Lord's Supper on the wall. The abbot was very impatient, upset that he was taking so long. He would walk in and Da Vinci would just be sitting there staring at the wall, deciding for hours, deciding what part he was going to touch up next. And the abbot was very aggravated and says, "When are you going to finish that?" And he says, "Get out of here. Great art takes time. Leave me alone," said Da Vinci. And he kept bothering him. But there was one thing he did that finally got his attention. He threatened to paint the abbot's face as Judas in the Lord's Supper. That took care of it. Didn't bother him anymore after that. God's purposes take time to work out. There's no way to rush the purposes of God in a church or in a country or in your life. There's no way to rush a person who is in pain, and that's what Job's so-called friends couldn't understand. They couldn't figure it out. They kept trying to say all these things to be helpful, but they kept saying the wrong things, which is what we often do when someone is grieving. "Oh, I'm so sorry, must have needed an angel in heaven, or it must have been God's purpose." Marianne was talking about this morning, and Kate Bowler's book is all about this. We say the wrong things. Job's so-called friends may have been somewhat theologically correct, but they were existentially unhelpful. They kept saying the wrong things over and over again. So the second point is patience means understanding that God's purposes take time to work out. But then there is a third and final point, and it may be the most important one of all. Patience means putting your trust in God no matter what happens to you. And this is something that Job finally began to figure out. He began to figure it out through his suffering, not in spite of his suffering, but his suffering helped him understand it. His pain began to help him see in a way he had never seen before. It is the divine geometry, isn't it? God's power is made perfect in our weakness, not in our strength, not when things are going well. It's when you are at the bottom, when you are hurting. That's when you begin to see God. That's what Job finally figured out, I think. In one of Ibsen's plays, one of the characters says to the singer, "Who taught thee to sing?" And the singer replies, "Oh, God brought me sorrow." And that's how I learned. Fosdick says, no calamity, no courage. No stress, no strength. No problems, no sympathy. No cross, no Christ. And that's what Job finally figures out. Out of the pain of his suffering, he begins to see God, and then he can proclaim with great joy, "I know my Redeemer liveth." Now I begin to see. Paul talks about it in Romans 5. It's a very odd phrase. We rejoice in our suffering. Do you really do that? We rejoice in our suffering. Listen to the rest. Because suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope never, ever disappoints us. That's what Job finally figured out. He sat in my office one summer years ago with the glow on his face like Job of old. "Bill, I want to tell you my story, and I want you to share it with others. I have hit bottom, and there I finally found God. I finally realized that I could put my total trust in God once I hit bottom. I've lost everything, my business, my home, it's all gone. But at this point, I believe I understand who God really is in a way I've never understood it before. I've been to AA, and I've dried out, and I've experienced the humility of the welfare line and bankruptcy court. And I'm going to move to Greeley, Colorado, where my brother has a house I can move into, and the creditors won't take it because he owns it. And I'm just going to start over, and I'm going to be fine," he said with a big smile. But he said, "I'm having a hard time finding a job, and would you be a reference for me?" I said, "Well, sure, I'll be glad to." And he said, "Here's the other references I have." And I looked at the list: Tom Landry, Roger Staubach, Lamar Hunt. The list went on and on like that. And I sat there looking at the former head of the Cotton Bowl Committee, like Job, with a big smile on his face, just starting over. Tell them that everything will be fine. No matter what they are suffering, tell them that God will be with them. They will meet God at the bottom. Make sure you tell them that. Tell them never to give up on God, said Alex, because God will never, ever give up on them. "Okay, Alex," I said. It was the last time I ever saw him. I said, "I'll tell them And maybe one of two of them might hear it and have a hope for the future that they never felt before. And then a thought hit me. I think Job told the same thing to his rabbi, and his rabbi decided to sit down and write out the story. And that's what we call the book of Job. It's a book about Job's persistent endurance and God's persistent love for you and for me, no matter what happens in your life or mine. To this God be all honor and blessing and glory and praise from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all.